Fantastic, thanks, Brendan. I'm kicking off this start of the virtual fundraising walkthrough, but I do welcome Lucy and Emily and Roz to chip in. And also, if you have any questions as we're going through, do pop them in the chat, and Emily's keeping an eye on that. So I'm happy to answer as we go. I think, as Brendan was just saying, that there's a huge wealth of opportunity in virtual fundraising, and I'm sure many of you are here today because now more than ever, because of the situation that we're in, it feels like an opportunity to test and experiment and learn and try new things using technology to enable your ideas and your innovation. I wanted to talk a little bit about making sure that you have the right idea for testing in the first place. And by that, I don't mean going through a laborious ideation or insight or innovation process, but just some really clear thinking, some strategic ways of thinking about your idea, thinking about your audience, and thinking about how you're presenting that to them to make sure that you as an organization are really clear on what it is you're trying to achieve with your virtual fundraiser. I really like this diagram as a way of making you focus on your core proposition and thinking about the three things that are really key. And if as an organization, you can define the three things in these circles before you get started, I think it makes it much easier to have every conversation after that. If you're very, very clear using just a few words to define who the audience are, what the activity is that that audience are going to be undertaking and why they're doing it for you, what's the link to your cause, and then after that, every decision that you make comes back to, does it echo back to your core proposition? Now, we at Massive believe that the kind of most successful fundraisers work when those three things interlock in the center. So when you have an audience who wants to support your cause, naturally, doing an activity that meets their needs and fits with their life, and for a reason that really makes sense for them as an organization and fits with that activity. So it's just something to really think about. Brendan. Fab. So the most important part of that is knowing your audience. I did talk about this a little bit last week on the webinar, so apologies for those for whom this may be a slight repeat. We're just going to go into a little bit more detail about that. I think now more than ever is a really key time to know exactly who your supporters are. There's a chance, that the virtual fundraising market may become slightly more saturated than it had been before as more people try and do new things. But there's plenty of space in there for everybody to have a go and for everybody to get their fundraisers out, as long as everybody's really clear as to who their audience are and why they are encouraging them to support. So who are the people most likely to support you as an organisation? What do they already do for you? I think is a really important question to be asking, because you shouldn't be asking them to start something completely new. If you think about, walking down the road in East London, for example, and seeing all the new different pop-ups that have started any day of the week, there's lots and lots of new novel ideas that start out in the market, but very few of them actually make that to any kind of mass appeal. And so when you're thinking about your activity or your idea that you're going to be doing, it's probably something that your supporters are already doing. It's probably something that they're already doing for you. And that doesn't mean that it's not exciting or innovative, because you're going to use that activity to present to them in a new way of how they support you, but it isn't probably something that's completely new to the market. How can you get to know them better? Sorry, Brent.
Maybe, I'll just wait for you to say next slide.
Thanks. How can you get to know them better right now? I think is something really important to think about, and what are their needs and wants for you. Okay, Brendan. That's okay. This is an empathy map commonly used in design thinking. I'm sure many of you have seen one before. If you haven't, just Google it. There's plenty of them out there, and we'll be sending these slides around, and you're welcome to this one, but there are plenty of these that you can find, and lots of places where you can read up on how to use one. It's a really clever tool and a really clear way of focusing your thinking about who your audience are and how are they experiencing the world right now. And it really pushes you to think about not just how are they experiencing you, but what else is going on in their world. Because I think those of us who work in the sector are very often guilty possibly of thinking that the world revolves around charity or that the world revolves around our causes, but unfortunately for our audiences and for our supporters, that just often isn't really the case, and that they're living in quite a difficult, complicated world with many, many messages all of the time. So using an empathy map will really allow you to get under their skin and think about what life looks like for them at the moment. And then at the bottom, you'll see that it gives you an opportunity to think about their pains and their gains. Any idea that you come up with, it should offer value to their life in some way. So if you can think about the fears, the frustrations, and the obstacles that they're facing right now, you can think about how you can help them overcome those with the value that you're adding with your fundraiser. Brendan. Fantastic. So how do you get out and find them? There's 3 ways that right now you could all leave this webinar today and go out and get audience insight, actually pretty quickly and easily. So the first one that I recommend is just using data. So what are people already doing for you? What are they searching for on your site? What are they talking about on your Facebook pages? You know, what data do you have actually already about your audience that you can mine? There's some great examples in the sector of mass fundraising events that occurred just because somebody noticed that you know, DIY fundraisers were all doing the same kind of thing, or it was a very popular way of fundraising, or just because somebody noticed that a search term was being regularly used on a website and it was returning not returning a page, you know, but clearly there was a need there from people looking for something. The other thing you can do is speak with them. It doesn't have to be a big labor intensive insight study. She says, probably talking herself out of work there, because that's something that we do, but people are at home now and they love to give their opinion, so really do give your supporters the opportunity to speak with you, get on the phone to them, send out surveys, and there's really simple tech that you can use. There are plenty of different suppliers. I know that YouGov have a real-time survey panel, for example, as do many, many others. You can get responses in just a couple of hours from people sat on their iPhones. You can put creative in front of them, you can put questions in front of them, you can ask them what they think. And it's a really actually quite inexpensive, quick way to understand how people are perceiving your organization, or how they might be perceiving an idea that you're presenting to them right now. So I do really encourage people to do that. And then the third thing is social listening. And again, there are plenty of tools for this. I think social listening is one of those mystical things that people talk about that they're doing, and it sounds really complicated and expensive. And I'm sure that there are really clever ways of doing that. But also, you can just go on social media yourself. You know, what are people talking about? Who else do your supporters follow? What are they saying? What are they thinking? Forums are great, like searching Reddit for the name of your organization, for example, and having a look at what people say about you, or searching for the name of a product that you've already got potentially and seeing how people interact with it. And just have a real dig around and understand what people are saying and thinking and doing right now that you could possibly jump on. You know, I think the stair climbing, like Brendan was saying just then, you know, if you suddenly realized that quite a few of your supporters were doing something like that, what could you do with that information? How could you jump on that? How could you make that exciting and relevant for your organization right now, would be an interesting question. Brendan. And think about motivation. So this is a diagram. If anyone's ever been in a workshop with me, it's one of my favorites. It came out of a lot of work that we were doing at Massive with supporters and participants in mass participation events. We were doing lots and lots of qual interviews, and we realized that there was something quite interesting going on with people and how they talked about their participation in those events. Mass participation fundraising, whether that's community fundraising, whether that's DIY events, whether that's physical events, whether that's virtual events, whatever it might be, it normally requires you to tell other people about it, and that is never more true than it is for virtual fundraising. You know, at the heart, as Brendan was saying, of really great virtual fundraising is people having conversations, people sharing what they're up to, people live streaming their activities, for example. So when you're choosing as a supporter to do an activity, you are essentially making a decision that's going to say something about who you are as a person. Just like when we go and choose, you know, whether we're going to have a Mac or a Dell or a PC, or, you know, whether we're going to carry an iPhone or an Android, everything that we do as consumers makes a decision and a statement about who we think we are as a person. And somebody deciding to take part in your fundraiser is absolutely no different to that. if anything, potentially a little bit more, because they will actively be talking about it. And what we've noticed is that there are two things at play here. So one is the cause. How much am I affiliated to this particular cause or this particular organization? How much do I say that? Do I want that to be a reflection of who I am as an individual? So, for example, health causes often at the very left-hand side of this, people really motivated if they've had a very recent health experience. That can also be true of anything else that somebody really connects with on an emotional level. They might have had a really personal connection with, and they want to talk about that as part of who they are as a person. Sorry, Brendan. Thank you. At the other end of that, we have the activity. So how much does this activity say something about who I am as a person? If you are a runner, for example, you might be quite like being known as the runner. I spoke once in a call interview to a gentleman who ran regular marathons, and he really loved being known in his community and in his church community in particular as the guy that ran regular marathons. That was a huge part of his identity. So he was likely to take part in a new marathon running event without really needing to know much about the cause itself. And that's where these two triangles work. So the more you identify with a cause or an organization as part of your identity, the less bothered you are about what the activity actually is. So if I really consider myself to be a huge supporter of Cancer Research UK, for example, I'm a cancer survivor, I like talking about that. Perhaps there's a milestone or an anniversary coming up, and I really feel very strongly about that. I probably will do pretty much anything that's on offer right now in order to fundraise. So I'll get involved with an activity. It doesn't have to be that unique or that different, because the thing that I want to tell the world about is my connection to that cause. At the very other end of the scale, if I'm the sort of person who's fun and always looking for something different and unique to do, perhaps, I'm always the person posting half-naked selfies on Instagram or something like that, and I see the towel challenge, I don't need to necessarily have a connection to stroke. I don't have to have known somebody who has had a stroke necessarily, because I really engaged in the activity, and I really kind of see that as a reflection of who I am as an individual. And as long as I kind of agree with the cause, I'm not morally opposed to it, I'll happily get involved. Brendan. So when you're thinking about the activity that you're doing and the idea that you've chosen, I think this is really important to think about where on this scale that activity sits, and that will help you make decisions about how you should position that with your supporters. So on the very, very left, if you're looking at a very cause-driven group of people, the volume is going to depend on your supporter engagement. Your participants will really come exclusively from your supporter base and from people who are really connected to your cause. That means your marketing costs are probably going to be lower. It means you're probably going to have more engagement from those people, both in the short and the long term, and you're probably going to get higher average values. You can definitely ask them to fundraise a little bit more. At the other end of the scale, if you're much more activity driven, sorry, Brendan. Thanks. The volume's really going to depend on how unique the activity is. I don't want to put people off, but it is very difficult to get something at this end of the scale that really does kind of take the world by storm, as the new Ice Bucket Challenge, for example. We've all sat in brainstorms and had those conversations about how to find those ideas, and they are out there, but you do have to be aware that they're much, much more difficult to get traction with. You're going to probably see lower average values because the interaction someone's got with you is much more transactional, much more likely to be a one-off donation, and your marketing is going to really depend on how tight your targeting is for that unique activity for that particular audience. And then, sorry, Brendan, sitting somewhere in the middle, I think is an interesting space. Potentially, you could imagine that it brings you balance and you could be everything to everyone, but there's also danger of being nothing to no one. So I really would, urge caution on sitting completely in the middle and not having a really clear target audience. Thanks, Brendan. So the other thing to think about when it comes to your idea, so you've got your idea, you know who your audience are, you understand why they're supporting you and their motivation, and that helps you make some decisions about how to position that idea, how to market that idea. The other thing I think that's really, really important is making sure that you understand as an organization, what does success look like for you? And that might mean some really difficult conversations internally. Do you want value or do you want volume? You might not be able to have both. Do you want income? Do you want awareness? Is this about one-off income donations now, or is this about long-term engagement? There are some questions, and I think using a sort of scale like this, having a conversation and popping a little arrow maybe on the place that you consider yourself to be at is a really helpful conversation to have, and to really focus you, because you cannot make decisions about how to market this product, how to interact with your supporters, etc., unless you understand what success is going to look like for you. Brendan? And then prioritization of those success factors is absolutely key. So having those difficult conversations up front before you even start thinking about tech or anything like that. If value is the most important thing to you, and that goes at success factor 1, if you've got an idea that's going to bring brilliant brand awareness and tons of people to know about your cause, but that's success factor 3, then unfortunately that's not the right idea for you. You need an idea that's going to bring value first. So knowing internally, strategically, what success looks like, prioritizing those, then helps you decide which is the right idea to take forward. Thank you. I think I'm handing over to Roz.
Yes, thank you.
Were there any questions? Sorry, I saw things going in the chat.
We have just had a question in more about social media and tech, but I think we'll leave that to the end if that's okay.
Okay, great.